we will go ahead and upload them. Okay, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but actually, I changed my mind. Can you run slides on your machine?
Yeah,
Just
okay.
yeah, because then I can jabber.
Okay.
And okay. For those of you on Meet Echo, we are just getting started. Yes, if you could do that.
You have your adapter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I just used it earlier today. I think it's in here. Of course not. That would be too easy.
Did you forget it in the last
I don't
room,
think
or-
so.
I will have one.
Where it is.
You already got one? Or no? Oh, I should run the slides for my
Yes.
eyes.
Yes.
Oh, we got it.
You got it. There's a couple of different reasons for that. I'll tell you that.
Did you send them to me?
No, I was actually just getting ready to.
Okay.
Put them on Christoph's. I've forgotten your name. I'm so sorry. I see you all the time, and I forgot your name. I didn't quite understand the message you sent me.
Sorry?
You sent me a message in Jabber, and I didn't understand it.
Oh, probably Lorenzo.
Apparently in Tran.
Okay, yes, because the microphone was not working.
Oh,
The microphone
okay.
in the line, so
Oh, okay. Thank you.
it's okay now.
Great. Perfect. Right, so here, as soon as that exits itself. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So they're on there.
Fantastic.
I will be the first.
You will be the first. Okay. This is the NTP Working Group. We are just getting started. We do have some remote participants. We have our remote participant queue. So I'm assuming you all are using the Meet Echo interface and you know what to do if you want to get into the queue. And we will Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm reading Jabber at the same time. That's always dangerous. But anyway, so don't forget to get in the queue if you want to be in the queue and you're remote. And if you have allowed Meet Echo to have access to your microphone, you can speak like you would normally. Blue sheet's going around. Everybody needs to sign that. The next thing I need would be a minute taker and a Jabber scribe. Jabber is pretty lightweight for us. Does anybody mind doing that? Tal, you'll do the, okay. Do I have any minute taker volunteers? Going once, going twice? All right, well, I guess we'll have to do it from the recording. That's always fun. All right, so
This one?
that's it. So as you all will have already figured out, we have a little bit of a kludgy schedule this week because I apparently did not hit the final submit button, and therefore we did not have a session requested. So what we have done this week is we've divided our work into 3 portions. We had a ad hoc working meeting of the NTP Working Group, primarily to discuss NTS and the BCP earlier today. Let me back up for just a second. Go ahead to the next slide. The note well. I forgot the note well. So this is the Ietf Note well. Everybody is aware of this. You clicked a button when you registered for the meeting. If you have any questions, be sure to see me. Next slide. So our meeting this week is divided into 3 portions. We have the working session we had earlier today, primarily on NTS and the BCP. We have this meeting, which is going to be a little bit higher level discussion of all of that and talk about next steps. And then we will get through all of the primary points today. And then on Friday, we're going to have a meeting that's primarily going to discuss the TICTOC work in the 1588 MIB, the Yang module, and the scalable synchronization stuff. And the primary reason for that is we really need to get some leadership guidance on the IEEE IETF coordination topics. So we will meet again on Friday, and that will be the primary point. And Suresh is coming to the microphone.
Yeah, Suresh Krishnan. So one thing I want to say is there's a IEEE IETF coordination meeting tomorrow, like morning in the AM. And this is like, I put up this item for discussion there. So I'll have some kind of initial response for you soon after.
Soon after that. Okay, excellent. Thank you. And for those of you who don't know, this is, that is Suresh. He's our area director now, as of the last IETF meeting. And so anyway, moving along to the NTP Working Group status. No, you're still on the right slide. So I'm going to go through these really quickly, and then I'm going to come back to Dieter to talk more about the NTS work. So we have several things on our plate right now. We have the network time security work. As you all are aware, we had a working group last call in the March timeframe. We established, after the Buenos Aires meeting, we established a design team that's been working on that. And they have been making some progress, and there is more progress yet to be made. We don't have an update for this meeting, but we do have some progress to report on that. And I'm going to, why don't we go ahead and move to you reporting on the progress for that. This is the second set of slides on there. The pink box is over there.
This one here?
Yeah.
Yes, Christoph speaking. I'm here to report on the progress on the NTS documents. Karen already mentioned there has been no progress on the actual documents. We've been busy on the next slide, please, with the design team to process the tons of feedback that we actually received in the last call. And yeah, let me instead just talk about what we discussed in the design team. Again, next slide, please. Okay, the main issue there are some items on the agenda for the design team, but the main issue that needs to be solved first is that the way we wanted to do things initially in the NTS drafts, and I think it's still in there, with a custom key exchange protocol that was just wrapped into extension fields of NTP packets, did not work out because we needed to transport actually chains of certificates, which were so large that would cause IP fragmentation and generally large size of the NTP packets, which is also generally a problem. Yeah, we would get problems with NAT devices with the IP fragmentation. We might get the problem that the resulting NTP packet would be rejected by a client or server just because of its size, even after the fragmentation had been reverted. And also IP fragmentation has some negative implications on the protocol security. And so we went ahead considering alternatives. The first alternative would actually be to just still run the NTS custom key exchange protocol over extension fields as originally planned, but with some mechanism to do the fragmentation so that it doesn't have to be done on IP level. This would be tons and tons of work. And so we are strongly considering other alternatives. Something that has also been on the table at times was to just run the custom key exchange protocol, not over extension fields of NTP packets, but just externally over, for example, an additional TCP channel, which still doesn't solve the fact that we've been advised that IP fragmentation is bad on a security level and might also not solve other problems. What we are leaning currently towards is doing at least the key exchange for the network time security protocol via DTLS in some way. This might either be done via just DTLS packets on some UDP channel that might or might not be UDP port 123. In any case, we would always secure, by the way, always secure the actual time synchronization exchanges by just a MAC on in an extension field on regular NTP packets, and this would be done over UDP 123. And the last alternative that I haven't described is that we might also do DTLS pretty much over the channel that is represented by extension fields of actual NTP packets. So this would go back to UDP 123. Next slide, please. Also an issue that is related to this heavily is that we somehow might or might not want to deal with the usual NTP rate bandwidth or packet rate limitations, because on the one hand, there might be suppliers that just enforce these limitations on levels that are not the actual NTP software, so out of the control of the NTP software. And also we have a requirement somewhere in the NTS main document that says that NTS secured traffic must not negatively interfere with non-secured time synchronization traffic, in this case NTP traffic. And so it's also debatable whether or not pushing the rate limitation levels with key exchange packets might fall in that category and might endanger that requirement. So the alternatives are pretty much we could run whatever it is that we're going to run over UDP 123. And in that case, we have to pose the question, do we respect the usual rate limitations or do we not? If we do not, then the whole key exchange setup might become very slow, which is something to keep in mind, but this would also represent kind of maximum compatibility. And then the other big option is to not run over UDP 123 and just ignore any rate limitations that are usually enforced. Okay, next slide, please. Here we have a list of issues that need to be decided pretty much no matter what key exchange mechanism we go for specifically. And the first one is, and we've talked about some of these in the side meeting that we had a few hours ago. The first one of these is what is to be done with unauthenticated timestamps that we might get as kind of a side effect of key exchange. because we do the key exchange mechanism over actual NTP packets. And I think the weak consensus that we've reached is that it is healthy to forbid that these, especially these unauthenticated timestamps, are used. Whereas, because we have a requirement that a hybrid mode must be possible, it is probably not a good idea to hard forbid the usage of unauthenticated timestamps overall. Then the question needs to be posed how to handle peer mode with the key exchange model that we go for, and also whether to handle it at all. And one alternative that we might go for, because we want and need to push some helpful version of the document out soon, would be to postpone peer mode actually, because some consensus that we've reached, or some result of the discussions that we've had, was that peer mode isn't all that important to most of the people that use NTP. And that it is important to have reasons where they might be persuaded to use other mechanisms. The same discussion pretty much is to be had about authorization, both server and client authorization. Mostly client authorization is it healthy to postpone this issue and have a document out that doesn't deal with it yet? And we're kind of leaning towards yes, that is healthy. For both these things and also the NTP broadcast mode, it is important to keep in mind that these might be excluded in the first version of the document that we push out, but shouldn't be excluded forever. Like it's important to keep in mind that these should be possible with the mechanisms that we choose, which especially goes for the question whether or not the mechanism that is chosen supports two-way authentication. It is important that it does, so that it can support these 2 bullet points. And then also the question needs to be considered how the chosen mechanism actually ensures the requirement that we have for cryptographic algorithm agility. Okay, next slide, please. This is just a list of bullet points that are on the agenda for the design team, but that are pretty much falling from relevance because these are only relevant if we choose to go for the NTS custom key exchange. And since we're leaning towards at least not choosing that for the mandatory to implement key exchange algorithm, these can healthily be postponed or not thought about for now. Okay, next slide, please. Other things that need to be done is, first off, the handling of Cipher suites as it is in the documents currently is not written very well, and this needs to be improved upon. We have a draft from Anshul that might help with dealing with this issue. And something that has already been done, and this was in the context of the working group last call, this is actually, I think, the only item that can be said to be checked off the list successfully, is that we generalized from HMAC procedures, which we had chosen in the specification as the only way to do a MAC, to MAC algorithms in general. Something else that was discussed was where to put and how much text to put in the documents about the chicken and egg problem, which is to say that the security mechanisms need some sense of timing, and then the timing needs security mechanisms to be reliable. And the consensus that we have hovering right now is that we need enough text to clearly specify what NTS needs as a requirement, but the actual deeper discussion on this should not be anywhere in the NTS documents. It might go into some kind of external document. Would be a good idea to have it somewhere. Pretty much the same thing goes for discussion about just a comparison between different overall security mechanisms like NTS or AutoKey or the symmetric key exchange. This would be healthy to have available somewhere. We just feel that it doesn't really belong in the NTS documents. And then we have also one issue, the issue of symmetry of the message sizes in the actual time synchronization exchange, where it was discussed whether it might be relevant that the request and response message are of the same size, just to increase the symmetry. in the communication. We do not yet have any kind of consensus on this. It hasn't been discussed much as far as I remember. Next slide, please. Okay, what's to be done next? The first thing, as I hinted at, is it's important that we clarify one key exchange mechanism that is actually mandatory to implement for any implementation, so that potentially all the different implementations have something that all can use. And this needs to be specified in the NTP draft. Something that might help with this is a proposal by Daniel Franke, who's describing the use for DTLS for what we intend to do. Yeah, and then just a clear specification of how the mechanism is to be used, specifically in the NTS for NTP draft. We then need to figure out what to do, or if to do anything about the peer mode, and need to specify the question about the unauthenticated timing information if the question poses itself due to the key exchange mechanism, like if we have these unauthenticated timestamps flying around in the course of key exchange. And then we should see that and how we include the work in Angel's draft into our specification and use this. Next slide, please. So this is pretty much poses the question of how to go about publication of these documents. The next thing that's going to happen is we need to get a new version out for the NTS for NTP draft, and we need to have another working group last call. It still says right after the next face-to-face meeting. Karen has hinted at that she wants it to be sooner. One issue that we still have remaining is that even if we postpone stuff from the NTS for NTP draft, we also have the generic NTS draft, and this needs to contain material about at least the broadcast mode. That's the issue specifically, I feel. So even if we push that out of the NTS for NTP draft, the NTS for NTP draft requires that the NTS draft be published, and so we have to figure out what to do with it. And we feel that in the course of the working group last call, while we got a lot of feedback, we did not get concrete feedback about the quality of the specification about the broadcast mode. Yeah. And then it might be possible we have a third document, the CMS for NTS. This is largely used for, or would largely be used for, the custom key exchange protocol. So huge amounts of what's in there are not relevant anymore if we don't use that as the mandatory mechanism. And what is still relevant could be just taken into the other documents. So it might be possible to drop this, or drop the publication process for this document at least, depending on what we choose as the key mechanism. Okay, do we have a next slide? No. Then that's it, and I'm open for questions and discussion.
Okay, so just a couple points before we open the floor for general questions. Based on the side meeting we had earlier today, we sort of have a couple of next steps, and one of them is Daniel is working on a draft for us, and then we will have, I'm assuming, continuing calls at some interval. We'll figure out what
design team.
For the design team itself.
Yes.
And I'll talk about this a little bit later when we get to specific scheduling, but we've also talked about the concept of having a face-to-face interim, specifically probably in the Boston area, either in September or October. We're going to put some dates out on the mailing list to see what might actually work. So obviously we only have a 1 hour slot now, and so I don't know how much of the detailed questions that we want to get into. A few, very few, but you get an idea of the status of the work. So are there any questions about status or approach or anything like that. Any remote questions? Nope. Okay. The one other thing that I did want to point out is if you go to tools.ietf.org, go to the NTP wiki. At the top of the wiki, you'll see a link for the NTS Working Group Last Call Design Team, and we're doing a fairly decent job, or they're doing a fairly decent job of keeping rough summaries of where they are. And there's also a link to a Google document there that has some of these issues articulated a little bit further. So, any other questions about that? Nope, fabulous. The next thing on our to-do list is the BCP, and I'm going to send Dennis to the microphone. Thank you, Christoph. He has no slides.
Hi there, everybody. So I don't have any slides to show right now, but I'll just go over the current status of the BCP document. It's currently up on the data tracker as draft Riley NTP BCP 02. That's a bit of my fault because I didn't understand how items get promoted, so I will be resubmitting it sometime this week as draft Ietf NTP BCP. And the draft has been reviewed by a few people now. It has some good information in it. More review is always welcome, so if you have the time to review it, either in its current form or once it gets uploaded as an Ietf document, if you could send me your input either directly or on the mailing list, I'd appreciate it. Right now, there are a few areas, other than just general editing and making sure all the links work. There are a few areas that we're looking to improve before we move it forward. One is in the security considerations. The current draft has nothing there, it just has a TBD. I intend to supply something this week, just some general text about how important time is to security to begin with, and then also the highlighting the parts of the BCP that deal directly with security. So that will be there in the coming week or so. We also have Greg Dowd working on some information for load balancing, which we'd very much like to get in. But it's still in progress. I'm sure it'll be very comprehensive once it gets in. At the working meeting we had earlier today, we came to a consensus that the best path forward would probably be to take the document in its current form, make the modifications to those two sections that I mentioned, clean up the rest of the text for any stray links that might be there, and we'll have a target to consider moving it forward toward working group last call at the next interim meeting, which would likely be in about a month. So you should expect to see some activity on that document over the coming weeks. That's all I have right now. Wondering if anybody has any questions just on the general flow of things.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Let's go back to my slides. So the next set of documents are a set that I'm going to defer to the next virtual interim, but I did want to highlight them just a tiny bit. We have an ongoing discussion about extension fields, and we have an ongoing discussion about the RefID documents. We talked earlier today about the distinction between RefID additions that RefID things that are backwards compatible versus those that are not. I think, and there was some desire to see some consolidation of the drafts that we have, potentially consolidated into the set that are backwards compatible and the set that are not, or consolidation that would make them make it clear which ones were backwards compatible and which ones were not. I don't know, Harlan, if there's something in particular that you want to say about these. I don't know if you've tried your microphone remotely. Oh, there he goes. I just asked him that so I could push the red button.
Oh, thank you. This is the first I've heard of extension field proposals that are not backward compatible. So I don't know what that means yet, but
I was talking about the ref ID stuff, I believe.
oh, okay. I'm not aware.
I just want to...
Okay. No, I mean they're out there. There's a number of extension. The extension field draft that Danny and I are working on has to do with goes to some mechanism around what is a what is an extension field. There are also out there drafts on some ref ID proposals, and there's a number of other extension field proposals that are out there. So they've been out for a while. I haven't had much feedback on them. The other thing I will say is that I sent Brian Utterback an email, and I think I've sent it to Danny as well, that has a 15 or 20 line hunk of pseudocode that shows how to crack an NTP packet that includes an arbitrary number of extension fields, possibly followed by a legacy MAC, and how we can use that to parse a packet. And all you need is a switch that says, if I've got something at the end, do I prefer to parse it as a legacy MAC or an extension field? And it's just, as I've said, it's not a big deal.
Okay, so let me ask a question of the room. How many people have read any of these drafts? Okay, so we need to figure out how to get these reviewed and moving forward. Is there anybody here or remotely that can volunteer to review the any of the ref ID documents? Okay, excellent. Oh, good. I see it. And then the extension header ones. These are all really short drafts, actually. So, and as part of the reviewing them, you could also think about how they could potentially be condensed. So, and I think it's really important. Actually, I don't want to. I think one of the things that we need to look at is for the people that are reviewing the extension field stuff, we need to review the RFC that was recently done in the context of these. So if you have an interest in that particular draft, you might want to volunteer to review that draft, those set of drafts. Okay? I'm trying not to name names, but so anyway, I would like to see these on the table for the next virtual interim and see if we can get them resolved and make a decision on them one way or the other to move those forward and get that set of issues addressed. If not, the concept of doing a face-to-face interim to deal specifically with NTS will probably expand to deal with NTS and this set of drafts when we get all the key players in the same place. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Okay. So the next topic that we have is a document submitted on the Mode 6 protocols, which despite your long history in the IETF, you named it in such a way it didn't show up in the tools. But before, so I had asked Brian to do a draft on the, we've had for a long time on our list of to-dos, documenting a piece that got left out of RFC 1305 when we did the update to NTP, and it had to do with the Mode 6 messages. We actually had a conversation earlier in our side meeting about whether it makes sense to proceed with this or not. And there was some feeling that it's basically a management tool, and that by that we don't really want to be encouraging people to use it anyway. We want to be encouraging them to use standard management protocols instead of using something like this. And so especially with Harlan remote and Brian sitting here, we'll double check this on the mailing list, but sort of the consensus was maybe we don't need this after all, and maybe we would that by publishing an RFC at this point related to that particular piece, that we would be encouraging people to do something that we really in general don't think we want them to do. Go ahead, Tal.
Relaying Harlan, he says, we need it about this draft.
So, so Harlan, you say that we need it and that no working alternatives exist. Can you jump back? Oh, you're in the queue. So you can just speak, Harlan. I haven't knocked you out of the queue yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that it was left out was an oversight, and that's a bug. And if some other alternative exists, that's some other framework to implement it, that's great. But let's have that, because Mode 6 provides critical functionality, and it would be nice to have something working before we decide to deprecate the old way.
Harlan, this is Heiko. I basically, my opinion with this is that we don't have to drop it entirely, but I don't see a requirement for creating an RFC for this, basically because we are trying to standardize a management protocol for this one single specific, let's say, application space for NTP. And it's, in my view, if we want to standardize the management, monitoring, and configuration possibilities of an NTP service instance, we should, if we really want to do that, we should do that with one of the existing standard protocols. I don't want to depreciate Mode 6 packets or anything, but I just don't think that it's a lot of it's a very high priority to standardize this way of managing an NTP server. It's probably the reference implementation is the only implementation using it, and that's fine. And there will always be implementation specific ways of monitoring and management. But I would like to focus on all the other working items we have on the agenda of this working group, and just leave that as it is, and don't create an RFC out of it.
Okay, if I may, if you want an implementation specific way to do that, we have it. It's called Mode 7. Mode 6 is an implementation independent way to perform NTP monitoring that requires no additional mechanisms. So again, until there's a working alternative, I'm opposed to getting rid of the contents of Mode 6.
There's a question here from Daniel Frank. Does making it informational resolve the dispute?
So
Go ahead,
you're not going to answer?
I'm waiting to hear what you say because, well.
Oh, okay. So Brian Haberman. So first, in response to what Harlan said, it wasn't an oversight. We actually made a conscious decision to leave him out. I can't remember the reasons for it, but there were probably good ones. But I actually want to respond probably somewhat to the question that Tal just relayed, but also what Heiko just said. So people don't know where to find the Mode 6 commands because 5905 actually obsoletes 1305, which is where they were defined. So people don't think to go back and look. So there's a couple of options. One, which is what you just said, and just let people try and find them if they really, really want them. Which, if the working group wants to do that, that's fine. we could go the route of just publishing an informational RFC that says, here's what the reference implementation does, and we're done. Or if you really want to be correct in the status of this in order to actually represent what you just said, we publish the RFC, but we publish it immediately as historic.
Yeah.
And it basically says, yes, this is what people have done, but we don't recommend doing it going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that documenting a certain specific, let's say, feature or functionality of an implementation is subject to an RFC. I mean, I would see that an RFC is basically trying to standardize the way how other implementations and all implementations basically who claim to be RFC compliant should deal with that. And my point is that, as you say, this is a historic thing. So I'm probably in favor of either publishing it as an informational RFC, as an historic RFC if you want, or just document it on the ntp.org website of the project and say, this is how it currently works. If anybody's interested in it, for me, this is part of the documentation of the reference implementation and not subject to an RFC.
And in general, I agree with your initial premise that there's really no reason to publish something that's implementation specific. However, because 1305 does document NTP and includes the mode 6, people are going to look for it in some fashion. So, from my perspective, it doesn't matter. I mean, if the working group wants to do one way or the other, I'm perfectly fine with it because it's no skin off of my back.
I will point out, if I may, that one of the reasons to have mode 6 is to allow monitoring of NTP, and by keeping it as part of the protocol, it's a very lightweight mechanism that can be very useful while a system is coming up or in the face of other issues. If you're going to say, we're not going to give you this mechanism unless, in order to provide monitoring of NTP, you're going to use this other mechanism, you're adding complexity to the system, even during times of startup, and I think that is short-sighted.
So Harlan, I'll just say, completely in jest, you have problems with SNMP?
Go ahead, Suresh.
Suresh Krishnan. So I kind of disagree with Hugo's characterization of this. I think it's okay to publish something as historic, right? Even if so if it's just one implementation, probably not. But if it's more than one, it probably makes sense to just document what's in there. And like Brian said, it's something that was taken out, right? And if it causes confusion, for somebody looking, it's same thing happened in V6, right? We took out M and O bits from the specification, and it kept coming up for 10 years. People say what do they mean? What do they mean? And we still haven't put it back, but people just say oh, the previous version had it, this version doesn't. So if that question goes away, if people are actually asking that question, then it makes sense to publish even as historic.
So you don't have a problem with us publishing it as historic? Okay.
So there's another comment from Daniel Frank. Not all RFCs are standards, and then he adds, having something out there to explain how to interoperate with the reference implementation is a good thing, even if it isn't a recommendation or standard.
And his battery's going to die. Okay. Go ahead, Anshul, sorry.
Just to add from the security point of view, I would recommend documenting all these mode 6 information, because we find out that there are several probably firewalls who are dropping some of the mode 6, mode 7 queries from security point of perspective. But since all the mode 6 queries are not documented, they don't really know which ones exist. And we have actually found out so many mode 6 queries which make your clients vulnerable to delete unnecessary information, and then that could be exploited. So it's important to have them documented somewhere because people don't know and they are not able to prevent
Okay.
themselves from.
So you would go for us documenting and then recommending not use them unless you
Yes,
absolutely have to.
Because
Okay.
I couldn't find, we found out some queries that are not documented anywhere, but they do exist. And that's a problem, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Anshul.
So Suresh, again, so yeah, so if you go for historic, like, so what I heard is like Anchal is going to contribute text to the security considerations to Brian. Go ahead.
Okay, so Brian, so I hear consensus. Oh, go ahead, Rob. I wouldn't want to deny you your mic time.
Rob Nagy, Deep Dive Networking. Just after a quick sidebar, it does seem like with the consensus of making the recommendation that we don't suggest you use it for all those reasons, that would fit nicely in BCP. If we're going to make a best practices document, we're recommending a best practice. So maybe we could move that to there and then make the decision about whether we document it as historic or not for just that subject. But it should maybe be added to BCP because it certainly is a recommendation we should decide if we make.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're saying maintain a separate.
Just reference whether we recommend to do it or not. Hey, this was here.
Okay, so the recommendation should not be in the core documents, what you're saying. Go ahead.
May
Go
I
ahead,
jump in for a moment when it's convenient?
Go ahead.
What you're advocating here is losing the ability to type NTPQ-P and see what the status is of the NTP instance on your machine or
Right, and
on
there's
your
a lot of
network.
people here yeah, and there's people here with their thumbs up thinking that's actually a good thing to lose. So that's a
Good thing to lose.
Well,
Yes.
wait. So Harlan, just to clarify, if we document this as historic, it doesn't mean that you can't use it. It just means that we don't recommend you using it, but that doesn't mean we're not gonna send the NTP protocol police out because Karen's got too many things to do anyways.
Again, I'll feel a whole lot better about these things when there is a known working implementation of something to replace it.
So, well, yeah, so we have 12 minutes left, so I should probably, well, you're new to the mic, so I'd like you to have a word.
Sebastian Flieger. And yeah, I think running mode 6 over the network is a different thing than running NTPQ on your machine. And for running it on your machine, it doesn't need to be in the standard.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. Thank you.
So you're gonna ask me a question?
I was going to ask you a question.
Yes. You looked right at me and said, let's ask Brian.
Oh, that was at least a minute ago. So, so Brian, I like then, it sounds to me like there's rough consensus to move forward with this document as we've discussed. Can you, so first of all, I need the, Harlan, since you are one of the strong proponents of having this documented, I'd like to be sure that the NTF folks definitely review what's there and make sure that it's a good document.
Okay.
I will send a question about adopting the document as a working group document to the mailing list, and then Brian will submit it with the right name. Okay with that?
Yep.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so back to the, so I think okay, so on to the next slide. And so we're going to move quickly through this. So as I said, we're talking about doing some sort of an NTP face-to-face interim in the Boston area, primarily focused on NTS, but also looking to resolve some of the other issues. And I have some rough schedule stuff going forward. I'm going to leave Christoph to continue to, you can figure out the schedule for the NTS Working Group Last Call Design Team meetings going forward. So that's, we're not going to discuss that here. We will have probably 3 interims between now and Seoul. I'm currently looking at the week of, and I'll send the dates out to get some rough feedback on them, but we're looking at something the week of August 22nd or 29th. and then September 12th or 19th, October 10th or 17th. So there's some, rough weeks there. I'll send that out on the mailing list to get some feedback. And then I'm looking at turning one of those virtuals into a potential full day face-to-face in the Boston area, either the September set or the October set. And we'll work on the details of how to do that later. Then obviously Ietf 97 is the week of November 14th. I think if we make some basic choices, I think with Daniel's, with Daniel's input that's coming, I think that there is a chance to move to working group last call prior to Ietf 97. Christoph is looking very skeptical every time I say that. But you have to have objectives. You have to have goals. So at that point, that brings us to the end of the NTP items. So go to the next. So I'm going to move on to TICTOC with 9 minutes left. Let me read Daniel's comment on here first. Okay, so Daniel hopes to have his NTS proposal done in about 3 weeks, which is pretty good. So that'll be in advance of our next virtual interim, which would be a great idea. All right, so for the TICTOC, oh, he's going to read what I just wrote.
Again, relaying Daniel, my goal, by the way, is to have a relatively complete first draft of my NTS proposal in about 3 weeks.
Thank you. And thank you, Daniel. So the next thing I'm going to step through is where we are with TICTOC. Actually, go to the next slide, and I'll come back to this one. I'm not sure why I put them in this order. So to talk about some of the specific working group items in TICTOC, the MIB has completed Ietf last call. We were just talking about that. We are expecting a final update from the authors dealing with a few remaining issues, and then we have the resolution of the IEEE copyright question that's on the table. We have 2 documents that have completed working group last call and are awaiting Shepherd write-up. The multipath synchronization and the enterprise profile. And we're going to be working on those later this week. And then we have one that has completed working group last call and is awaiting an editor update. And that's the 1588 over MPLS. And we need to get, Yakov was on the, was planning to do an update to that, and I haven't received that yet. So at some point we need to decide whether we're going to move forward with that or not. And then if you move back a slide. So that brings us to the other 2 items that are on the plate right now for TICTOC. And one is the Yang data model. And that is also a question, that one we also need a little bit of feedback from the IEEE Ietf Coordination Committee. It's a slightly different issue in a sense that we're trying to we want to make sure that we can transfer the Yang module from Ietf to IEEE at the right time. And so it's about getting all of the I's dotted and T's crossed so that we know before we proceed with publishing it here that we will be able to transfer it there. Part of the issue here is that IEEE 802 and Ietf have long figured out how to mostly collaborate with each other productively, but IEEE 1588 is not IEEE 802, and so sometimes that makes it just a tiny bit more complicated. So that item is on the table, and then the last thing that's on the table that we really haven't done much with is the scalable synchronization networks, and I don't see those. Oh, there they are. There is still a question about what we want to do with the scalable synchronization work. We did spin up a separate mailing list for that. There hasn't been a lot of activity, and so we need to figure out what we want to do with those drafts eventually. So that brings me, I believe, go down a slide, and then down another slide. So I've already really talked about next steps, which are the interim meetings that we're going to have going forward. So this brings me to the end of all of our business for the NTP and TICTOC working groups. So we will have a short meeting on Friday, based on, I mean, check your email to make sure it doesn't actually get canceled, because the primary work out of that will be, what do we do based on the feedback we got from the IEEE Ietf Coordination Committee. Any questions or comments at the end of this? Okay. Oh, there's Suresh.
Suresh, so one thing I would like is like some kind of rough timeline on when this next steps would happen. So like for the merger of the groups. So some kind of tentative timeline would be nice. Like if we can arrive at it like soon.
Yeah, actually, I must have cut that part out when I wasn't paying attention. There is still a plan to merge the two working groups. At one point, I thought perhaps the TICTOC work was dying down and we would just close it and use NTP only. But further conversation has led us to believe that maybe there's still enough that we want to keep a working group for time-related items in the IETF. So I think that the path we're going to do is the time-related items, and a timeline for that.
No, just I don't want it right now, but I want it like probably soonish.
I was going to say, did Brian tell you to ask me that question?
No.
So
no,
yeah,
Brian told me to ask you right now to give a time. Like, so,
no, yeah, so we need to figure out a timeline for that. We would like to do it.
I just need a time for a timeline. That's it.
You need a time for a timeline?
Yeah.
So all I have to do is tell you when I plan to do a plan? Perfect. I'll give you a timeline by Friday.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments, inappropriate remarks? All right. With that, I call the very late NTP meeting to a close. Everybody enjoy your dinner. I'm kicking you out of the queue, Harlan. There you go.
I told Brian, you know why I love this group?
What?
Because I come back after like 5 meetings and about half the topics are related to stuff we did. When you asked if I did ref ID in mode 6, I was like, I think I was there when we decided we were going to say no.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, please do, because Dennis has been begging for help for over a year. So.